Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming here on a Friday evening. It's nice to have you here join our post-election discussion, Decoding Taiwan's 2024 election results. My name is Yifan Lai. I'm the Program Officer of Friedrich Naumann Foundation Global Innovation Hub. And today we are happy to have Da-Wen Xie, the PhD candidate in sociology at National Taiwan University, who's also a freelance journalist, who I think some of you already know from his works, as our speaker. Da-Wen will present a comprehensive analysis of the election outcomes, including some key takeaways that we should watch out for the next 2 years. But first of all, let's welcome the head of our FNF Global Innovation Hub, Ms. Anna Marti, to deliver her opening remark.
Thank you, everyone. Please stay seated. I'll stand over here. I think it's easier like this. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for, as Yifan said, thank you for spending your Friday night with us. And also good local time to everybody who joined us online over there. Yeah, it's great to see all of you, not just some empty chairs. That's always my biggest fear. Yeah, my name is Anna Marti. I'm heading the Global Innovation Hub of Friedrich Naumann Foundation here in Taiwan. And yeah, as Yifan said, today we're going to look a bit deeper into the Taiwan election. But before I start, maybe a few quick words about this Naumann Foundation, who organized this event today, in case you haven't heard of us yet, which I think might be possible because we're still relatively new kids on the block. So Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom is a liberal foundation, which is headquartered in Germany. What makes us liberal? It's liberal in the German sense of the word, not so much the American sense of the word. Well, the fact that the topics that we're working on, they're rooted in liberal ideas, liberal values. So we work on issues like human rights, or social market economy, freedom of expression, rule of law, democracy, just to name a few. Our office is called the Global Innovation Hub, and it used to be located in Hong Kong, but we came to Taiwan in 2021, which I think was a very good idea. Yeah, so we work on global topics, but of course we don't ignore where we are located, and that is in Taiwan. And that brings me to today's topic, which is last week's elections, last week's results. The results themselves, they're pretty clear, right? We can look at them, we can put them in a data set, and they're easy. About 72% voter turnout, DPP won the presidential election by a relative majority, thereby winning, sort of like making history by winning the 3rd consecutive term ever since democratization. KMT came in 2nd, even though they tried to prevent that beforehand with trying to forge an alliance. Maybe itself also an innovation, but I guess in this case one that didn't work out that well. And the third party that came in was DPP, which still won 4 million votes without having a big party apparatus behind them, which I think is also an interesting fact that sort of came out of this. So these are the facts as we have them. But what we're here for today, this is something that you can already read, right? But what we're here for today is to go one step behind and see how did we get here? How did these things happen? What are the developments that caused this? Who voted for Ko? Why did DPP lose the majority in the Legislative Yuan? What were the deciding issues? And a little spoiler alert, it was not unification. Here to give you the insight is, as Yifan introduced, Da-Wen Xie, who also co-authored the report that Yifan and Da-Wen wrote together, and that can also be downloaded from our homepage if you want to sort of like compare what their predictions were before the elections. Yeah, so I'm curious to see the insights, apart from the dry numbers that I already gave you. And yeah, thank you for being with us tonight. My last thing that I always do before we get started is I thank my colleagues who organized all of this, and particularly Yifan Lai, who is our host here tonight. Thank you very much. Let's have fun and let's start.
Okay. Thank you, Anna, for your kind words. And now, before we start, we'll have a lightning round of question and answer game with our speaker, Darwin.
Which I'm not really good at, but here we go.
Next slide, please. So first, please describe the 2024 election outcomes in 3 adjectives.
Well, so first of all, thank you for having me. And
5 seconds.
oh, 3 adjectives. I think it's actually pretty much happened as expected, if that counts as a adjective. That is, I'm not a linguist, but here we go. So it pretty much happened as expected. I think it is. In the end, sort of frustrating actually to watch some stuff, descend into gutter politics, if there ever is. And so there is that. And despite all that, I think the final adjective for me, it is still quite anxiety-inducing towards the end. It's sort of still hanged in the balance, but yeah, pretty much turned out as expected. Yeah.
Okay. Next one. Please sum up the DPP, KMT, and TPP campaign strategies in 1 word each.
1 word.
Starting from DPP.
I mean, in terms of in the microphone, does it work? Does it work? The microphone. Okay, sure. So I'm buying some time if that's a gimmick. In terms of analysis or in terms of commentary?
Just
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the DPP, I guess, again, quite adequate, I would say adequate in a sense. So, of course, some mistakes, some blunders here and there, but in general, it did the job. In terms of the KMT campaign, I do think it's actually quite scattergun. It failed to actually, they failed to actually work on a theme. I think it's veering left, right, and center. And towards the end, as I said, it really descended into gutter politics. In terms of the TPP, I think it's revealing. It's revealing in the sense of both the promise it holds and the limitations it faces, and that is something that we'll elaborate on later in the presentation.
okay, next one. Your go-tos next in Taiwan for election night while watching the vote counting.
So the thing is, right, when I was watching the vote counting, and I joked to my friends, I think also to Yufen, like, my state of mind and everything, my personality is really not suited for the democracy, in the sense of I'm so anxious, I'm so nervous, I nearly vomited. So I didn't really eat much, but I drank. So I drank 2 bottles of beer and a glass of whiskey, which, by the way, Johnny Walker. So, and this is actually not a joke. That's literally true. And literally true, also literally true. I was watching the concession speech of Ko Wen-je, and I was like, I'm gonna drink my glass of Johnny Walker when he thanked his running mate, Wu Xinying. He didn't! He didn't even thank his running mate. And by the way, he didn't congratulate the victor. He didn't pledge to work with the DPP. He didn't pledge to unite. I'm like, what kind of politician are you? But whatever, So, yeah, Johnny Walker.
Okay.
For this time, not really a go-to, but, for this time.
And the final one. 1 sentence advice for DPP, KMT, and TPP based on the election results.
Well, I'm not a professional, political operative. 1 sentence advice. So for the DPP, I do think they can try to work on actually towards a better political culture. Actually, I do think in the long term, in the short term, of course, street fighter, brawling, even, gutter politics, it may sound, like for like, it may sound good, but I think in the mid to long term, it would work in the DPP's favor to actually build up a more engaging, more sincere, and a more, reasonable political discourse. I think that is and I will elaborate on that point later. 1 sentence advice for the KMT, I really don't want to give it too much to the KMT, but I do think they need to think about, so if I worked at KMT HQ, which I won't, but if I were to work at the KMT HQ, I would really advise against the current model that they are relying upon, which is basically an alliance between local factions, the few remaining Washington elites, and a bunch of key opinion leaders, a bunch of KOLs in the form of Xu Qiaoxin and such. I do think it really limits the appeal and limits their long-term prospect, mid to long-term prospects. If they are not content in being, perpetually in the minority, I do think it is something that they need to rethink. In terms of the TPP, I think the best advice I have for them if I were to work at the TPP HQ is actually really to try and be nimble, try and be flexible, try to actually, because they need brand differentiation. They cannot, for the next 2 to 4 years in the legislative term, they cannot afford to just look like KMT for young people, minus the mobilization machine, minus the apparatus. That's really not gonna bode well. And but there's this risk, like if you cannot come up with innovative ways, either to collaborate with the DPP or to criticize the DPP, to scrutinize the DPP, if they cannot come up with that, if they sort of become, afterthoughts in every news bulletin, oh, the KMT is boycotting, is filibustering, is criticizing the DPP for X, and the DPP is also saying X, just, on TikTok, that's not gonna work. That's not gonna work in the long term. That's really gonna limit their appeal and even make them go backwards, I think. So yes, brand differentiation, therefore more flexibility, more innovation, but whether Ko Wen-je and Huang Guochang have the ability and the temperament to do that, I think is another question. Yeah, they have the biggest egos I ever see among politicians, and that's something, politicians generally a bunch with very large egos, but Huang Guochang's ego is just unparalleled. So, I mean, whether they can do that, another thing, but yeah.
Okay. I can see that you will have a great career working as campaign strategies for
Yeah,
other parties.
no, really, no, really not. Yeah, I can't wake up at 6 a.m. every day, so no, not
Some
really.
too. I see some faces here. Okay. Anyway, thank you, Dawan. And now the floor is yours. We look forward to your presentation.
Oh, right, thank you. So I have only 15 to 20 minutes, so it's not really gonna be that comprehensive, but I'm just gonna point out a few things that you may not have been, or some of my working assumptions and working hypotheses. So it may not be, 100% solid, but it's something that I like to share, some stuff that I have, spent some thoughts on. So two main points two main takeaways that I would like to present. First, this is not a realignment, I think. So the rise of TPP, the rise of Ko Wen-je's insurgents, some people are saying, I think, rather understandably, but in a very alarmist way, this is gonna spell realignment. This is the rise of third-party populism in Taiwan. I really doubt that. I don't think it is true that Ko Wen-je opened up another political cleavage, that voters have already developed fatigue when it comes to cross-strait issues, and Ko Wen-je won because he focused on bread and butter issues. It's simply not true. If you look at all three campaigns, right? Of course, if you ask Ko Wen-je, by the way, I need to introduce myself. Sorry, I'm a freelance journalist and I write about Taiwanese politics and other topics as well. And throughout this election campaign and post-election, I did statistical work, so data journalism, as well as interviews with voters and such. So of course, if you ask Ko Wen-je voters, they will say, yeah, Abe really cared, so Ko Wen-je really cared about housing prices and stuff, but it really is not a sufficient explanation. You cannot take that at face value, not least because regardless of what you think about the individual policies, both the KMT and the DPP actually did offer some policies on housing, on taxation, on wages, etc. To say that only the TPP, only Ko Wen-je cared about that is not true. And to say that the TPP's campaign revolved around that is also not true. If you look at campaign adverts, if you look at stomp speeches, if you look at, advertisements on the side of buses, it's simply not true that Ko Wen-je campaigned on housing or any other particular policies. He campaigned on, transcending blue-green traditional politics. So not quite. And Later on, by means of preliminary stats, I would argue that the DPP, both the DPP and the KMT, held on to the support that they actually had. And Ke Wen-je's base is mainly, predominantly those who are unreachable by the KMT. Of course, they skew young, they skew, urbanite. That's, of course, everybody knows that. But the thing is, it's unreachable by the KMT, never fully convinced by the DPP, and they may also espouse a different worldview at the present moment, and that's something I'll elaborate on. And on China, I will argue, so of course, a lot of, especially foreign observers, are quite keen to say, oh, what is this message? Is this a message to China, to the world? My argument would be that there's nothing new, actually. There's nothing new on China because as for the KMT, throughout the campaign, I will present this part later on, this is this last-ditch attempt to revive the so-called 1992 consensus, and guess what? They failed again. I mean, oops, like 2020, 2016, they did that three times they failed. So, yeah. And DPP firmly, so post Tsai Ing-wen, right? You now come to Lai Ching-te, they are no longer really pro-independence. It really annoys me when you see, headlines saying the pro-independence DPP won. Regardless of what you think about independence, in the actual sense of the word, in terms of cross-strait relations, in terms of Taiwanese politics, in terms of the US, by the way, the DPP is no longer pro-independence in any meaningful sense, but old tropes die hard. That both the KMT and the TPP tried to paint them as, they are still pro-independence, but it's actually not true. And Ke Wen-je basically tried to sidestep this issue of how to deal with China with, a lot of platitudes. And at the end, in policy terms and in terms of the consensus within Taiwan, Ke Wen-je pretty much added nothing to the debate. It's not a criticism, though I really want to criticize him. But in terms of, I'm trying to be as impartial as I can here. I'm here to provide analysis, not commentary. In an analytical sense, in terms of Taiwan's public opinion, I don't think Ke Wen-je added anything new to the debate. So what you have, basically, is people sort of converging towards a single position of, like it or not, 中华民国 Taiwan, the ROC Taiwan position of, maintaining the status quo of being not just autonomous, but also de facto independent. You basically cannot really diverge from that position, in any particular position, in any particular direction. And Tsai Ing-wen throughout the 8 or even you say 16 years, wow, she and the party leadership pretty much really did bring along her voters and the voters, the DPP base, and we are sort of, I wouldn't say content, but we are settled upon this position right now. So my argument is that, and some of you may have already read this piece of mine on the Initium, Tsai Ing-wen's 2020 coalition, I'll argue, included many borrowed votes. What do I mean by this? So people often say, and a lot of commentators, they sort of compare, and I mean, this is what you do, you sort of compare the 2024 election with the results of the 2020 election, and you say, wow, the DPP lost a lot of votes, right? But if you look at this, right, so in the 2020 election, of course, Tsai Ing-wen won big. Amongst 100 eligible voters, I think it is important to look at turnouts, by the way, so people who didn't turn out, so that's the gray part. In the 2020 election, 42 amongst 32 per 100 eligible voters voted for Tsai Ing-wen. Only 27 voted for Han Kuo-yu, the KMT nominee, and 31 either didn't vote or voted for Song Chu-yu, who was a contender in that election, lest anybody forgets. So there's that. But if you look at this, right, in the 2024 election, the DPP only gained 29 votes, so only 29 voters per 100 turned out for Lai Ching-te and Xiao Mei-qin and Li Kim-xiao. So that's 2024. But what is striking is that if you look at the 2022 local election, and of course all the usual caveats apply in local elections, they are not necessarily representative of national trends. Of course, we always say that local factors, local dynamics matter. But what is striking is that in the 2022 election, the DPP already only have 100%, amongst 100 eligible voters, only 25 turned out for the DPP already in the 2022 election. And that is strikingly similar with the 29 you have in the 2024 election. And if you look at individual counties and cities, 22 counties and cities, the DPP votes only grew so there's only an increase in turnout for the DPP of over 5% or more in 5 counties or cities. And those 5 counties and cities were those where local dynamics were such that they flopped tremendously in 2022. So you have Yilan, New Taipei, Tainan, and Jiayi City, which had a deferred votes, and that is why it dampened. So that dampened turnout. So what I'm trying to say here is that the 2024 election results compared to 2022, the DPP actually grew a bit. It's nothing to be scoffed at, but the growth isn't as big as some people may think. So it pretty much held on to the 2022 coalition. But if you look at the KMT votes, it also pretty much flatlined. There's a slight decrease from 30 in the 2022 election to 24, but it's pretty much also not the case that the KMT hemorrhaged or lost a lot of votes to the TPP. Their votes share, the share of voters who turned out for the KMT was also pretty much stable for the past 4 years. So what you actually have is a bunch of voters who already didn't turn out for either blue or green in the 2022 local elections, who then turned out for Ko Wen-je in the 2024 election. So people are asking, whether Ko Wen-je got more votes from the blue camp or the green camp. The answer is he probably only tapped into voters who didn't really support either the KMT or the DPP from the start, and they were like, they didn't turn out in 2022, or they voted for their third party candidates in their respective counties and cities in the 2022 local elections. And in 2024, they found a political home in Ko Wen-je. So there's that. Okay. So what I would say is that in 2020 and also in 2016, what we've witnessed is actually a lot of borrowed votes. So they lent their votes to Tsai Ing-wen in both 2016 and 2020, A, because Tsai Ing-wen looks reliable, but B, most importantly, because of the crisis, because people were in crisis mode in 2016, and especially in 2020, in the face of the anti-Iraq movement in Hong Kong, as well as the Han Kuo-yu factor. People think that Han Kuo-yu is really incompetent. How can this person become president? So that's the 2020 election. It was on borrowed votes. So without that crisis factor in 2024, though they no longer lent their votes to the DPP, and that's pretty much what happened. Why do I only have 5 minutes left? What the heck? Okay, so yeah, and to sort of corroborate this account, I would also argue that history actually does matter. KMT's loss historically doesn't mean the DPP's gain. So if you look at, so this line is the average turnout for Ko Wen-je, and those dots represent all the 368 townships in Taiwan, or districts in Taiwan. What you see is that if the KMT, if Ma Ying-jeou performed well in that township in 2012, Ko Wen-je has no chance of gaining above average votes. Ko Wen-je, all the townships in which Ko Wen-je gained a lot of votes, performed above average, are counties and townships, sorry, I shouldn't use the word counties, are townships in which the KMT machine, the mobilization machine, already failed in 2012. But whereas the KMT failed, the DPP not necessarily can pick up all the votes. So if you look at 2012, how the DPP fared in each townships, what you will see is that so Tsai Ing-wen cannot perform too well, or else Ko Wen-je will have no chance in gaining that township and gaining the upper hand in that township. But if Tsai Ing-wen performed too badly in that township, there's also minimal chance, so about 1/4, and it's really concentrated here, so Ko Wen-je can only gain the upper hand in counties where Tsai Ing-wen's performance was, mid back in 2012. So what you see, of course, back in 2012, a lot of Ko Wen-je's voters, which of course is predominantly young, didn't even have the right to vote. They will be about in their teenage years. But what you see is that in their teenage years, they have already living in this environment where the KMT local mobilization machine, which the KMT had relied on for 3 generations from, well, pretty much since the 1950s, the local mobilization machine in their township have already failed. So they are unreachable by the KMT machine, but they grew up in environments where people are not that warm towards the DPP. And that is the stage, that sets the stage for Ko Wen-je to perform well then later on in 2024. So this is an interview I did. It was due to time limits. I'm gonna go very fast here. So I interviewed a family, so siblings, sister and brother. Brother, 25 years old, pro Ko Wen-je, and 28-year-old sister voted for the DPP. Okay, and their parents are staunchly pro KMT. What I found was that I was really shocked when I heard how many old labels were attached to the DPP in the mind of the 25-year-old son. So he said, well, I didn't really want to vote for the DPP this time because I think they are always engaged in petty ideological fights, and they are so radical, they are so, sometimes violent. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he was like, they often fight in Congress. I mean, and I said, do you think the blue camp also fight in Congress? Well, sort of, but the DPP is more violent. A reminder, the DPP held the House for 8 years, so they have no reason to be violent in the House, but here we go. And he said, and that's pretty much in line with what his pro-KMT parents has always said. So I chatted with the pair of siblings, and they said, our parents always said the DPP's been a mob, right? And he said, the son, he said, oh, this is such a waste of money and time to remove Chiang Kai-shek's statue. Also the case for the pro-KMT parents. And you have not just a disinclination to vote for the DPP, but also here this weird dichotomy that is really a legacy of the authoritarian regime, which is opposing the mutually exclusive relationship between ideology and pragmatism. They sort of think if you engage in ideological fights, then you are not being pragmatic, you're not working on actual issues. So that is not the case. You won't say, if you are a liberal, if you argue about liberalism or conservatism, then you are not working on actual stuff, right? Abortion, gun control in the States, etc. Of course, there are actual stuff. But in Taiwan, amongst a segment of the electorate, there is this sense of, if you are engaging in ideological spats, then you are not working on day-to-day actual issues that matters to us. So there's that. But the major difference is that they also see the KMT as the other side of the squabble, and he sees Han Kuo-yu as useless. Therefore, they will never vote for the KMT. So for the sister, she, prior to attending high school, also espoused this kind of worldview. So she had this radical change in high school, whereby the teachers, or especially one particular teacher, asked them to debate on same-sex marriage, on gender equality, and shared stories about how people died for democracy and stuff like that, which actually changed her worldview, and not just towards the DPP, but also whole scale, thinking politics in different terms. So ideals matter, human rights matter, equality matters and sovereignty matters. It sort of changed her world view. So if you look at that, you have fundamentally different views on what politics mean. You have in the pro-DPP brother, why the heck do people care that much about politics? Is that a hobby for my sister? It's not something like, oh, people have different positions, move on, live with it. But for the pro-DPP sister, she sees fundamentally politics as debates and persuasion in terms of what with regard to values and ideals. And she was really, really proud that she convinced a formerly homophobic friend to back same-sex marriage. And that is, I think, fundamentally, and I won't say it's representative of all TPP and DPP supporters. Of course, this is an interview of two people. That's never gonna be representative. But I'm trying to say that deep down, it may not just be about prejudices, and it may not just be about cross-strait issues or housing prices or stuff like that. I think there are stuff that are deeper at play. And I want to sort of relate back to the point of, people are having this sort of fatigue towards cross-strait relations and seeing cross-strait relations, seeing the 1992 consensus and debates about that as unpragmatic. And, a lot of commentators, they say, oh, that's because, they've grown complacent. Sure, that is a factor. But I also think that this may also be a factor. Deep down, they think that issues about Taiwan's sovereignty and stuff, they relegate it to the category of ideological spats. And they see it as being fundamentally opposed to stuff that are pragmatic. Or else, why would they not even listen to what the DPP and the KMT has to say about, say, housing and stuff? I do think there may be this sort of factor at play. So on the 1992 consensus, so this comes to my second point. I really need to speed up. Sorry. Okay. So in terms of the 1992 consensus, and I actually worked on this piece with, her over here, my lovely, I nearly say my lovely partner, which is, no, not really in that sense. Okay, so I collaborated with her on this piece. So what we had, right, 1992 consensus, if you recall the 2012 election, Ma Ying-jeou really sold, the KMT sold the 1992 consensus, not in terms of sovereignty, autonomy, democracy, stuff like that. He said, that is the way by which, there's no prospect of unification anyway, let's build our economic ties, let's enhance our economic integration with China on the basis of the 92 consensus. They used to defend and advocate for the 92 consensus on the basis of on the economy. But in both the 2019 campaign and the 2023 campaign on the social media, you see only a quarter of posts that both mention the economy and the 92 consensus. The KMT knows that this is not gonna work anymore. So in the 2019 election, due to events in Hong Kong, you see the predominantly about 2/3 of Facebook posts on 92 consensus was about unification and related issues. And this time on, it's more about peace and war. But interestingly, even when it is about war and peace, the majority of popular posts on the internet was about countering this argument of the 1992 consensus can bring about durable peace. You have this fan page and Lai Ching-te himself, Shi Banmingfu, which is and Cao Xingcheng all voting for the DPP. So you have those people on this side, and you only have very fringe KMT candidates or very fringe pro-KMT commentators on very towards the 20th, 30th mark on this list, which is not showed here, talking about, oh, we need a 92 consensus to preserve peace. This is from September to October, so a 3-month period. So prior to November, the KMT has basically abandoned the battlefield. They want to talk about the ROC constitution. They want to talk about the cross-strait law, 两岸人民关系条例. He wants to say something like that, something vaguer. They basically abandoned the term 1992 consensus. They knew jolly well that it wouldn't work. But what happened in December, I am not privy to the discussion within KMT HQ. I don't know whether it is because they think, oh, we cannot abandon this anymore, or whether it is because Zhao Shaokang is whether it's the Zhao Shaokang factor that they started to double down in December on the 92 consensus. I had this weird, if you have seen that weird analogy between steak and congee, I'm not going to repeat it here, but there's that, right? L times up. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna go through this really quick. So what I would try to the point I'm trying to make here is that the KMT, I think, is gradually coming to the realization that the 1992 consensus wouldn't work. But whether this would last, but they sort of had a change of mind in December, and I don't know how this will go on. I really don't know, because, well, the KMT also had this internal discussion in 2016 and 2020, so I won't bet my house on they finally abandoning the 92 consensus. But what I'm trying to say is that they actually did know that it won't work, and they pretty much abandoned the battlefield, aside from very fringe characters. By fringe, I mean people like Hou Hanting, which is not even a KMT member. I mean people like Huang Zhixian, which is also not a KMT member, was a pro-unification, commentator. So I'm talking about people like that. So yes, that is the case, and that is often an underappreciated point. And I want to briefly speak about the point of why I say Ko Wen-je adds nothing to the debate. It's because he consistently tried to sidestep the issue of cross-strait relations, your legal framework under which you are going to deal with China. And it's pretty much in line with the interview that I presented, right? He was pretty much, his campaign rhetoric, so I'm pragmatic. There's no more old politics with me. So the KMT, he literally said this. The KMT is pro-unification. The EPP is pro-independence, but only 5% supports unification, 5% support independence, which I don't know where he gets his stats from, but neither will happen, but they keep on squabbling. He literally said this. He also said, the US will never let us be unified with China, and China will never let us gain independence, so why are we still fighting about this, which is a gross misrepresentation of the debates going on in Taiwan, if I think everyone would agree on this. But he literally is trying to present the issue of sovereignty, the entire cross relations at some sort of, in Taiwan we call 假议题, right, fake issue. So in terms of his stance, it's very, I think, nebulous is the key word. I really tried long and hard to find an adjective, and I settled on the word nebulous. So for those who don't know, it's like shrouded in cloud and fog. There's no refutation of the one China principle, but no approval of it, no arguing for it, no advocating for it either. It's not. In June, he said, it's not my responsibility to define what the One China principle and 1992 consensus mean. I will ask Beijing to clarify its definition if I'm elected in June with Japanese reporters. And towards the end of the campaign, he literally said this. He said the 92 is stigmatized. It's 污名化. It's already 它已经污名化了. It's 92. It's stigmatized. He will suggest, guess what? Changing its name, which is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. And he said, oh, we want to preserve our way of life, which is not at all controversial, but it also, it's not actually a refutation of the one country, two system proposal. So what are you talking about? He's literally not adding anything to the debate in a substantive sense. So what I'm trying to, so finally I'm going to wrap up and provide some keywords for the future. So I don't have a crystal ball. I won't try to predict the future. I actually don't fare well in that department. I don't tend to do that well in that department. I actually failed on my first prediction for the year. I literally don't think that the KMT will nominate Han Kuo-yu for the speakership, but they did. So, I won't make any predictions here, but I do think there are some keywords. First, obstructionism. Okay, obstructionism. The thing is, the KMT, when they were in opposition, really wanted to be as obstructionist as they can. They try to filibuster, and they go way beyond what the rules, what legislative procedure permits. If you have seen that, throwing flour, throwing, what is it called, intestines of internal organs of pigs in the house on the floor. Will they keep on being so confrontational and obstructionist? Now they have a reasonable chance of securing concessions from the DPP. This, I think, is a key thing in that this is a key point to watch out for. And the thing is, they weren't really accustomed to the fact that in democracies, when you're in the minority, life is miserable. But now their life may not be that miserable anymore. Then will they actually, grow up a bit. Sorry. But there is also a problem with the current core of the KMT caucus. You have a lot of people who were elected because of their ties to local factions, and you have a lot of people who got elected because of their appeal to the deep blue fringe. And they are basically KOLs on the media and on social media. So whether they have it in them to make concessions and compromises and deals, I think it's something to watch out for. In terms of the TPP, as I remarked at the beginning of the talk in the lightning round, I do think that it is in the TPP's interest to actually have some sort of brand differentiation. If you recall the charts, the first charts that I presented, throughout the campaign, Ke Wen-je failed to cut to basically get any votes from the DPP core and neither the KMT core nor the DPP core. He basically only tapped into the group of voters, the segment of voters who were already, not that interested in politics to start with, or at least not that identified with a particular party to start with. So his appeal, so people start to make those weird comparisons, but hey, the guy is no Boris Johnson and the guy is no Emmanuel Macron. Okay, so what his ability to grow, to expand his voter base, will depend on whether he can make inroads with either the KMT core or the DPP core. But with obstructionism, I don't think I can lead them anywhere, particularly because then there will be some sort of a KMT for young people, and I don't think it will work. In terms of everyone's favorite topic, de-risking, I do think it is in the gifts, so according to the Constitution, it is in the gifts of the president to decide a lot of stuff, a lot of policies, substantive policies that relate to the broad theme of de-risking and, alliance making in this, change day and age. I do think that is the route that the Lai Ching-te administration will keep on taking, but there are some possible flashing points when it comes into contact with Congress, and especially when it comes to, for instance, actual, budgeting. When it comes to the actual budget, we may run into some problem here. Finally, I want to briefly remark on the point of political discourse. Throughout this campaign, we do see a lot of gutter politics. We see a lot of misrepresenting of facts. We see a lot of debate that is, and of course that is, I won't say there was any, golden age in Taiwan's politics. There wasn't, and I won't say that any country's political discourse is particularly, ideal. It isn't. But in this election, we see stuff that really descended into chaos, and whether that is something that we in the civil society and of course also politicians can improve on, can make some improvements on, I think this will also be a key point going forward. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for the very detailed and comprehensive analysis. Now we'll move on to the Q&A session. So first of all, for our participants online, please leave your questions in a comment. And for on-site participants, maybe let's gather 2 to 3 questions for the first round. Do you have any questions, Marcin?
Thank you so much. Marcin Jerzewski from the European Values Center for Security Policy.
Hello.
Fantastic presentation. I would like to dive a little deeper into the question of fatigue and whether fatigue did or did not afford more voters to the TPP. So you described with data that Ke mainly tapped into voters who supported neither the DPP or the KMT and who might not have participated in previous elections at all. But then I wonder if this lack of political participation can't be described as fatigue. So I think that maybe from this angle, the fatigue factor is still a valid explanation for the rise of TPP, because the TPP emerged, as you interestingly describe, as a source of political hope and broke the fatigue. So I would appreciate it if you could entertain this interpretation a little bit.
Should I just answer straight away or, okay? Because my short-term memory really sucks right now due to, the late night shifts and everything, late night writing sessions. So yeah, I'll try to remember. It's a very good question. I'll try to remember.
Do you have a second question?
I was wondering if you could just touch a little bit on the potential reemergence of the cross-strait services trade agreement, and if that is possible, what are like the legal processes that could be raised again?
Sure. So should I answer straight away? So both very good questions. I think I will answer the latter one first. In short, unless something dramatic happens, I think there's no chance because it has to be initiated by the executive. These kind of cross-strait relations, cross-strait trade deals and stuff. I don't think it is in any way likely that the DPP government can be forced into doing that. I think we have a better chance of a votes have no confidence in the dissolving the parliament before that happens. But I would like to say that it is possible that falling short of that, the CCP or the PRC, Beijing would try to work behind the back of Lai Ching-te and Xiao Mei-qing's administration, would like to work behind the back of the DPP and try to directly establish some contacts with both the KMT and the TPP. How much they can achieve through doing that is, however, another question because, as I said, legally they really cannot initiate any trade deals or any stuff on that level, right? So we may be seeing more, I guess, if I were in Beijing and I want to exert more influence on Taiwan, I will not really go down the official routes. I think there is more to be gained for them and, the media scene, local communities, religious groups, stuff like that. Yeah. And to add on to that, I mean, previously China's approach towards Taiwan in terms of economy, it's pretty much what we call 让利. So they cede interest to Taiwan to entice Taiwan into, further integration and more talks with them. But in the current climate and with regard and considering how the current state of China's economy, I'm not sure how far that what they can offer in that sense. And they were actually talks, rumors this week about they unilaterally terminating ECFA, which is like, well, bring it on. Yeah, so there's that. I mean, not in an election year, and you want to, further disengage with Taiwan economically, well, be my guest. So in terms of, and your question, I think it's a very good, I think, alternative hypothesis. Sure, I think it sort of depends on what level we're talking about, because in terms of level, this is what I mean. So if you ask TPP supporters themselves, so the 20-odd-year-old first-time voter for Ko Wen-je, they will say that they have developed sense of fatigue. They will say that. They will say that. That's for sure. But I sort of want to challenge this. I think it's really the surface of what they think because, if there is like some sort of fatigue and frustration with politics, why wouldn't you have seen it? Why wouldn't we have witnessed it amongst older voters who, by definition, have experienced way more spats about cross-strait relations and should have the right, possibly, to have a greater sense of fatigue towards the issue. But the fact that Cohen just supporters predominantly skew young, I think it sort of undermines that. And further to that point, as I mentioned, I think this kind of fatigue is something to be explained, not the explanation itself. So my argument would be they think they have developed a sense of fatigue because they didn't really think that issue is that worthwhile to start with. They actually relegate it to the category of, old ideological spats from the start. And they say, it's getting nowhere. Why aren't politicians focusing on housing prices and stuff like that? I think it is something to be explained, that fatigue, not an explanation in and of itself. Or else, why so most of them did feel the sense of crisis in 2019. They did feel, oh, Hong Kong, that kind of thing may happen to us. And they did feel that Han Kuo-yu is a dangerous politician. So if it really is some sort of fatigue, you wouldn't have seen that, I think. So there's that as well. And finally, I want to make some sort of international comparison here. So I think, especially for foreign observers, when you hear, fatigue, it can mean a wide array of different things. So if people have grown tired of the debates on immigration, for instance, you have a bunch of voters who think, immigration, higher, lower, isn't really that relevant. I don't really care about that much. I care more about, the price of living, for instance, the cost of living, for instance. But that's not the case in Taiwan. People really do. So in terms of immigration, you have people saying, I don't really care one way or another. But in terms of cross-strait relations, that's not the case. People strongly oppose unification. If you ask them, they strongly oppose unification, have no interest in being. It's not the case that people don't care one way or another. It's just that they think that issue is getting us nowhere, and it's some sort of an old ideological spat. And in terms of, and of course, there are, of course, like for instance, back in 2019, 18, 19, oh, by the way, I do write about British politics, and in 2018, 19, people say, oh, get Brexit done, get on with it, we have some sort of Brexit fatigue. But in the case of Brexit fatigue, it's like, just get on with it. Just, make a solution one way or another, sign a deal, approve it, move on, right? That was the case of the Brexit fatigue. But that's not the case in Taiwan either. People don't say, let's just settle things with China and move on. People know that is impossible. How are you going to settle things with China and move on? There's not to use the unfortunate phrase of Boris Johnson, an oven-ready deal when it comes to cross-strait relations. So, yeah, I want to emphasize this point because even if we sort of describe this as a sense of fatigue, it isn't the same kind of fatigue that people are accustomed to in relation to, for instance, immigration and, for instance, in relation to Brexit or Europe. Yeah.
And do you have more questions on site? One more? Two more?
Thanks for the presentation. I wonder what is your guess on China's views of the results of this election, as much as you can guess. No one can be in the brain of Zhong Nanhai, but
Yeah.
What do you think might be the interpretation, and
Yeah.
whether they think that the Kuomintang is helpless and hopeless or not? Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Hello? Is it working?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, cool. So my question is about so we've seen that throughout elections, actually, we see KMT and then TPP trying to attack their opponents like very strongly. And I even see that actually KMT was trying to, Ho actually said that if he got elected, he's gonna send Tsai to
Open up
prosecution against Tsai after she stepped down. And also we can see that actually TPP's supporters are questioning the results. They say that, it's not fair, there are some frauds, there's something going on. And then, so would you see these, denials of the results and, retaliation against their opponents as like a very preliminary symptoms of the erosions of the democratic norms in Taiwan, or like the basis for like mutual tolerance has been like decreasing. Would you put it that way, or do you think it is something like temporarily?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Both very, very good questions. In relation to the first question, of course, the honest answer is I don't know, as you would imagine. And, both Xi Jinping and Donald Trump are Geminis, so they are famously unpredictable, just like me. So, sorry, I'm also a Gemini. Okay, so jokes aside, I do think one factor, I'm not a China expert, so I cannot really speak to that. I mean, if they were rational and if they actually know the situation on the ground, they would have changed tact 8 years ago already. And they didn't, right? There is something fundamentally wrong about China's, dealings with Taiwan. There's something fundamentally wrong. I cannot pinpoint what is wrong, but their tactics aren't working, hasn't been working. They didn't change tack. So there's some sort of inertia going on. So this is the first point I'm trying to make. The second point, and back to Taiwanese internal politics, I do think it would make a difference if both the KMT and the TPP have some moves, sort of have some shifts in their position. I mean, it will matter a lot if and this is more of a optimistic scenario from my perspective, but I may be overly optimistic here. But if the KMT and the TPP and Ko Wen-je both come clean and sort of also come out quite firmly saying, there will be no chance of us supporting a one China principle at least as a precondition for talks. Even if we are elected, we want China to not impose any preconditions for talks. I think that would change the calculation a lot. But whether they will do that, I think is a separate question. And for your question, thank you for making my point so well for me. So I didn't have the time to expand, to elaborate on what I mean by political discourse and political culture on my last slide. That is precisely what I mean: the undermining of the judiciary, the undermining of the of prosecutors, the undermining of the military, and the undermining of the electoral process. I do think it is corrosive. I do think it is highly. I think it is a symptom of not just. I mean, first, it's corrosive. It's gonna erode, as you said, the foundation on which democracy functions. But then it is also a symptom of the norms of democratic rule had never really been that established in Taiwan. I do think that's sort of a long-term reason for that. Whether this can change, I'm not sure. That's what I mean by obstructionism and everything. Whether the KMT and the TPP would say, you know what, let's drop that. Let's go back to actual compromises and deal making, or whether they will just kick us up and, for instance, in the first legislative term, try to establish hearings after hearings, try to do 高端真相调查委员会 or whatever. Whether they will do that and then spend all the legislative time on that, I think it's up to them, and sort of especially the leadership of the KMT is sort of in flux right now. So I cannot really make a prediction, but I do think this is one of the key points to watch. Whether they will still, continue on the path of the erosion of democratic norms, of the independence of specific state organs, and the roots of obstructionism, or whether they will change tact, whether they will see, that didn't really work throughout the campaign. We shouldn't double down on that. I think it is something that we should keenly observe. We should pay attention to in the next year, I think, at least.
So finally, we have another question for an online audience.
Yeah.
So yes, what is the great strategy that DPP used to gain the election? Is Taiwanese totally believe in DPP leadership to fight against China transnational repression?
Okay, good question.
And one more for an on-site.
Okay, I'm Christina Kioska from the Central European Institute of Asian Studies, and my question will be, what do you think, what kind of impact will it have if Tang Luo is actually made Speaker of the Parliament? What kind of impact will that have on parliamentary diplomacy? And I'm thinking here in terms of heightened relations with Europe and all the delegations coming and going. Do you think that will impact the balance of those delegations? And then also, how will you become the head of the Taiwan Foundation for
Democracy? Yes, love that. I love that.
Yeah, so please summarize your answers within 5 minutes.
Yeah, in 5 minutes, sure. So in terms of the first question, which was, remind me, what was the first question again? Okay, so in terms of that, I think there is some sort of a split within the electorate on the issue of China itself. Comparing this election to the 2020 election, so people talk about, in elections, people talk about issue ownership, right? Whether a party owns this issue, whether they are the most trusted on a particular issue. Now, back in 2020, it's very clear most voters, if they care about cross-border relations, if they care about withstanding pressure from China, they trust Tsai Ing-wen, they trust the DPP way more than Han Kuo-yu. I think what we see this time is some sort of split. One segment of the electorate still strongly believes that the DPP is the only choice on that, that they still own this issue in the minds of these voters, especially that image amongst that electorate will be reinforced, will be strengthened by the discussion on, for instance, domestically produced submarines, military procurement, stuff like that. And they tend to also care about 1992 consensus. But I think, especially amongst TPP supporters, their arguments, again, relating back to the issue of fatigue, their argument wouldn't, or their thinking wouldn't be, I don't really care one way or another about China. Their argument would be, I don't believe that the DPP is the only party capable of doing that, of defending Taiwan. I think Abe can also do well. I think Abe can even be better because they are less quote unquote provocative or stuff like that. So I think there's some sort of a split. And I do want to expand on that and say the entire election campaign in Taiwan this time, I think the KMT and TPP campaign is pretty much confused and confusing in the sense of they really don't know whether they should play up the threats from China or play down the threat. Should downplay it or to ramp it up, because they want to say, oh, Tsai Ing-wen, DPP is so provocative, caused 兵凶战危, caused danger across the street, caused a lot of danger. But if they really ramp up, if they really play that up and say, you know, the threat from China is very acute right now, then that's going to help the DPP. Right? So because amongst a large segment of the electorate, they still see the DPP as the party owning that issue, just that they don't think that issue is that acute right now. The threat is so acute right now. So they are pretty much in the bind. They want to paint the DPP as dangerous provocateurs, but they don't know whether to play up that threat. And more generally, in terms of general trust, not just the issue of China, in December, so even after all the sustained attacks from the KMT and the TPP on the DPP, administration, Tsai Ing-wen's approval rating still stood at 45%. Sure, it's not a majority, but it's good enough, right? Especially in the three-way race. So I really did doubt the strategy of why are you just trying to portray this DPP as this unmitigated disaster when you have 45% of the electorate of the population actually approving of Tsai Ing-wen and putting trust in Tsai Ing-wen. I think this is actually quite weird in a sense. So, and relating back, and for your question on Han Kuo-yu being the speaker, I mean, I really cannot believe this, but I really cannot believe you were talking about this. But yes, in terms of parliamentary, in terms of diplomacy and stuff, I do think Han Kuo-yu doesn't have it in him. He's a man of, okay, I'm going to paraphrase if you know a British political aide colleague Kane. In a particular hearing, he said, Boris Johnson is a man of many talents and skills. It's just that this thing isn't really, a part of his skill set. It isn't really, he really isn't good for this. What he is good for, I don't know. But he really isn't good for this. So I think if Han Kuo-yu is elected speaker, this job, this task of diplomacy and many other day-to-day operations in the House will be delegated to someone else. It would either go to the deputy speaker, in this case, they nominated Jiang Qichen, who has a background in diplomacy. He was literally a professor in international relationships, I believe, before he entered into politics. I think it will be delegated to him, and it will also be more, I think, party-based or inter-party based. It will come. The task will sort of fall to individual caucuses and individual politicians, individual members of Congress. I think that is my best guess. In terms of the foundation, I am less familiar with the internal workings of the foundation, I have to say, so I'm not sure, but my guess is that that won't be the priority of Han Kuo-yu either. I don't think he cares one way or another about this. I don't think he's strongly, he's not someone like, he's not he's not a cultural warrior in the mode of certain politicians, and he's not going to attack. I don't think he's just not going to spend that much energy on it, I believe. So again, I sort of think it will come down to delegation. Then if it comes down to delegation, then whom he delegates to, that's going to be the next big problem. Whether the KMT will have him delegate those tasks to someone who are more moderate, or whether someone that are more hawkish, I think that will be the deciding factor. Yes.
Thank you. So once again, thank you all for joining us on a Friday evening. And please enjoy the light meal and drinks we prepare outside. We will have the venue 20 minutes, like 20 minutes more, so you can enjoy and have small talks with each other. And for our participants online, I hope you find this discussion as insightful as I did, and wish you have a nice weekend. And I may ask my colleague to stop the live streaming now. Thank you.
Thank you.